Creative Loitering Podcast.
Okay, and we're
I just noticed the practicality of that giant recording button as you just smacked it.
oh yeah, I love the
oh, bap.
It really is nice having a big record button
Yeah.
Instead of just clicking everything.
Yeah. Or having to go like so you don't hit like everything else around it.
Right. Now, one of the microphones I was trying before we ended up going with the Shure SM7B was the RodeCaster.
Gotcha.
You know, that's what they use on the Adam Carolla show.
Sure.
It's got that red light. So what are we listening to?
Oh, this is King's Castle. It's another local band. I didn't mean to have this turned up, but
Well, you can control the volume on your phone or with this fader, whichever you like. You can reach over and do that or that.
on there's fine. This is turned up for Bluetooth.
So what are we listening to?
This is King's Castle, their latest release from like 3 years ago. It's called For Those Lost at Sea. I mixed most of the tracks off this, but some of them were regurgitated from older stuff before I met them like 16 years ago or something like that.
16 years ago.
Well, I mean, I met them in 2007, but they had stuff from before that, so.
Nice.
This was also mastered by Andy Van Dett.
What's the best?
No, I'm sorry. No, it wasn't Andy Van Dett. I apologize. This is mastered by Josh Mirsky in Albany. This is a little more indie than I'm used to working on. So, what I mean by that is, you know, I kind of was instructed to cool it with the use of drum samples and things of that nature. What I meant by indie is more like, you know, people who prefer like a more organic sound instead of me just going all Nickelback all over it.
If you want a Nickelback, you should Nickelback. Don't let people hate on your Nickelbacking.
But yeah, no, it's amazing that the spectrum of people you get to work with sometimes. Sometimes people just think that, like, you know, whatever you do is just killer the first time around because you're used to doing it and you know what they want. And then others, you know, that you've known for a while, they'll come in and they'll have a whole bunch of changes because you weren't hearing it the way they expected to hear it. Or they had a different idea in mind. So let's just say there's a lot of automation on this record.
I've had mixes that I'm 100% happy about.
Yeah.
And I sent it to the client, and they're like, hey, no disrespect, but that's totally not what I wanted.
Nice.
Yeah. And I'm still happy. I'm like, yeah, that was a badass mix.
Yeah, right?
And then there's been a couple of times where I'll mix something, and then it doesn't gel with the rest of the album. Like, it stands out.
Right.
Big time.
Here was the... all the budget for the record went into this song.
I could grab a CD right now. Like I'll show you the ones that I mixed and the ones that, you know, they just kind of had somebody else do it or just didn't try very hard.
Yeah.
And then they give it to the mastering engineer, and there's just the tonality is so far away that it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like the one song that I mixed on this one album, like
So
it just,
that's a single, and then
I mixed it like probably like they mixed "License to Ill" by the Beastie Boys.
okay.
You know, it's just got a real fat, round, full tone to it, and to me, that's what that song really wanted. That's what it needed.
Right.
You know, the artist had recorded the vocals in his bedroom on a budget microphone.
Sure.
And I just reamped the hell out of it. Just remastered it. I think I passed it through a Manley Verimu. And just added.
You used to have one, didn't you?
Oh yeah, I had a Verimu, and I used to use that all the time. It's almost like cheating because that was the one that had that gigantic iron wound transformer out the back.
Did you have that here? I don't think.
Yeah, it had so many tubes in it. You had to have
an air conditioner for it.
you had to have ventilation on top and bottom. So it was a 2RU, but it was really a 4 because you had to have so much ventilation just for this thing.
Right.
but it would just fatten everything up so well. It was almost like cheating. And you could just add massive amounts of gain to something. And as you're turning the gain up, it just gets fatter and better.
Right.
And, if there was one compressor in the whole world I could have, it would definitely be the Verymu.
Interesting. A guy who doesn't go to the 1176 first. Did you have that with the 737 as well at the same time?
Yeah, I had the 737. Yeah, I did.
Because you had that. Time. You also had the Shadow Hills unit.
Yeah, I've owned several 737s.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I'd keep
UAD
going back
actually
and forth.
Just modeled that.
Yeah, and I had tubes for that too.
Nice.
Yeah, so I've tried different configurations of the tubes. Somebody figured out that they sound a little fatter if you put these crazy Russian tubes in there, and I tried that for a while, and they were probably right.
I'm trying to think of the name of those because I had one that just burned out recently on a preamp I just changed. It was a fun name to say, but I can't remember what it was.
Avalon used to make some, well, they still do probably make some really good stuff. If I could only use one brand of audio gear,
yeah,
like for any hardware and microphones, it would probably be Manley. Like I would use their reference mic and their Verymu, and there's just like this long list of amazing stuff you could use. They have a new unit
called the Voxbox, which is pretty popular.
Yeah, they've had a few variations of that over the years, and it's always been very expensive and very awesome.
And very heavy.
Sure, yeah. Nothing they make is, geez, that. Yeah, and I had the massive passive EQ, and that's a beautiful EQ.
Yeah, there's actually Australian friend of mine on Facebook, one of the audio forums. He recently just got this unit that I forgot that CLA has because he never really talks about it in his videos past just pointing to it, but. Manley made an EQ. I can't remember if it's an EQ or a preamp or a combination of the two, but basically, in the middle of it, it has engraved Poltec in quotes and then EQ or something like that. So that's pretty interesting. I think it's like a 1 or 2 unit space.
In quotations, yeah, I like that. No,
like I actually pointed that out. Like it was like last week on Facebook. This kid Chris that I'm friends with, and he posted a picture of the unit that he purchased secondhand, and that was my comment. I like how they put Poltec, but inside quotes engraved on the faceplate.
People are still paying stupid money for those.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll look at gear on eBay or something and see what everybody's up to. And what I'm always surprised about is that things haven't changed much in the last 15 years, let's say.
Yeah, no.
They've gotten a little bit better, and the computers have gotten a little bit faster, but you tell me, couldn't you make just as good of a record in 2010 digitally as you could today? It would just be maybe a little easier.
It'd be easier now just because of all the cheat tools we have, but yeah, sure.
Yeah, like what's different what's new in the last 10 years?
2 things off the top of my head. I don't know if the first existed 10 years ago because I'm kind of new to the technique overall. But there's for me, like I said, newer tools are dynamic EQ. So it's not multiband compression. It's actually dynamic EQ. The first one I bought was the Waves F6, which is kind of cool. I use it sparingly. It's more so like if an artist, for instance, our buddy Carm Grasso, he's got a couple acoustic tunes, and he now sometimes like, you might be getting carried away with certain high notes or whatever on an acoustic, and something might just poke out a little too much just because of the nature of an acoustic guitar. And, you'll just go to that one frequency and drop that down and, hit the threshold. And whenever it hits that note at that volume, it'll duck it for you. It's not a compression, it's an EQ. So it changes the volume of the band, per the threshold. But who's got the other dynamic EQ that's really popular? There's one company called Fab Filter who are making, they've got like a massive following now. They have an EQ that just came out called Pro Q3, which has dynamic EQ built into it. But the other big one that I see all over these production videos online when top mixers and producers go through their sessions, there's a company called, I think it's Oak Sound or Ook Sound, something like that. It's hard to say because it's spelled weird, but they have a plugin called Soothe, and basically no one knows what it does. And that's literally what people say online. Like, we don't know what this does really. It's like it just basically it's like a harshness removal, and people are using it on like sort of like abrasive, distorted guitars and things of that nature, and sometimes two mixes depending on what's going on. But
that's awesome. Soothe.
Yeah, no, it's got these like different. I want to say it's sort of like a multi-band compression, like the way the parameters are set up, but I don't know, it's really hard to describe. And, that's sort of like what everybody else says online too. It's just like this magic thing where it just takes the harshness out without just rolling off treble. Like, there's been a couple guitar tracks I've had where before I got the Soothe 2, which just came out, I didn't want to spend that kind of money on a plug-in for like EQ stuff, but once I tried it in the demo, I just couldn't help but get it on sale. Because, basically, it was a better sound than me having to do a really sharp roll-off on the treble for a guitar to take the bite out that I didn't want there.
Right.
This just kind of like handles that without making it sound extreme. What I mean extreme is like artifact, stuff. So that's something to look into. But and I think people use that a lot on some overhead type of stuff for drums and things, because like you said before, these days people are recording stuff in a multitude of ways in different places at their houses, or subpar, less than ideal situations. So there's in today's productions and mixes, there's an increasing ratio of audio repair while you're mixing, which is kind of strange. The source material is not what it could be because the budget's not there. So now all these companies are capitalizing on tools to basically repair everything.
Exactly. And that's where the market is, right? I mean, that's
utility, I guess is what I call it.
That really started rearing its ugly head right around 2004 or 2005, where I started doing more mixing, and people who used to record at my studio would send me their mixes.
Yep.
Yeah, because they really wanted to record themselves. It wasn't even that much about the money. They just really enjoyed doing it, and the production end of it.
I actually hate recording myself personally.
Well, I think it depends on what you're recording, who you're recording, and where you're recording.
Sure.
If I was born 20 years earlier, I would have been perfectly happy with the whole career as a recording engineer, working in a world-class facility with world-class artists.
Yep.
I would have been very happy with that as my existence. Yeah, that would have been fine. Before everything started to go digital and everything started to change. That would have been a lot of fun, I think.
Well, not to go onto the timeline, but if you want to get technical, Sound City almost closed twice before they actually closed.
They did. Yeah. They came close a couple of times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I bring that up, actually. I have the documentary on my computer, and I just I watched a lot of it again. I think it was last week, so it's a little fresher in my head right now. But
great documentary. I like the part where the owner shows that he had the original receipt.
Yeah,
signed.
the invoice.
Yeah, it was signed by Rupert Neve, and he paid like $75,000 for this back in the 1972 or whatever it was.
Something like that. Add another zero now, but yeah.
Yeah. Like literally add another zero.
But hey, at least it's in commission at Dave Grohl's house.
We were opening up a studio. This was probably in 2001. Yeah. A few months after 9/11. We're opening up in a studio, and we've got like some partners, and we've got some investors, and we're lining everything up. And I end up on the phone with Solid State Logic rep.
Nice.
And
what was it?
yeah, and he calls me back, and he's like, "Okay," and he was a little cocky right off the bat. And he goes, "Okay, our cheapest console is $250,000, and that's for an 8-channel, and that includes a patch bay."
8-channel.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
An 8-channel console with the patch bay. It's so like, wow, a patch bay? Okay. Well, I wasn't going to pay $250,000 for 8 channels, but since it has a patch bay, I'll take it.
And the SSL badge.
Right. Yeah.
What models was that? Do you recall?
He didn't even say which model. that was his question to make sure I was a qualified lead, which I wasn't. You know,
Right.
we had nowhere near that budget
Right.
for that sort of thing. You know, not even close.
So it wasn't like a 4,000 or something like that, like a smaller version.
And that was the end of the conversation. I'm like, hey, you know, if we're looking for something way, way, way more expensive down the line, I'll be sure and give you a call there, SSL guy.
Yeah. So talk to you never.
Right. Andy was, you know, he just wasn't that cool about it. You know, he didn't say, oh, but we do have some channel strips you might like. You know, he didn't try. That was maybe before SSL made channel strips in '01. Maybe they were still hanging on to their old format.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they had like the what were they called? Not Alpha. Was it Alpha? They had like like the 1 unit like strips.
They did the 1 unit rack mounts, and then they went to 500 series a couple
Right.
years after that. And
Yeah, the Ultra channels, I think they're called.
yeah, so people had lunch boxes full of those all day long for
Right.
quite a while there. Maybe they still do.
Lunch boxes are getting really cool. I'm not sure if you've seen the latest stuff, but it's incredible.
What do they have?
This company, Radial, I think you've used some of their stuff before too. The bulk of their range is utility stuff like, you know, various DI boxes, bass preamps, that kind of thing, reamp boxes too. But they have a lunchbox called the Workhorse. A buddy of mine out in Ohio has one. He was more of a proponent of it when he first got it, but then it kind of became a drag for recall. But basically, it's a 500 series where it's got switches on the back where you can kind of put them in series or leave them separate, like each unit.
Okay.
And then there's also on the, I'm not sure what you call it, but like the fat section at the end where the on button is, there's actually a 8-channel summing amp built into this unit. So you can sum through it as well with like a DB25 or whatever.
Oh, that's got some value having that with it.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then most recently, there's a UK company. I think they're called Cranbourne Audio, and I keep seeing the ads online. And this one lunchbox they have, I don't even know all the features, but it's got like digital readouts and stuff, and you can do like, you can pipe in from like other types of gear, and I think it's got a some sort of digital interface on the back where you can recall stuff like from in the session and whatnot. So it's got a lot more protocol for interfacing. Basically, it's not just hardware that you have to go in or out from your interface. It'll do some of that digital work as well.
So what are some of your favorite references? Like if you want to compare a mix, what are some of your go-tos? Like to keep your ears calibrated.
I'm not sure which ones I should tell you, but well, one time, and this is a good reason why I'm a proponent for reference mixing, because I know I have some colleagues locally and beyond that kind of swear by, like, they've got that weird organic mentality, I guess you could call it, where they think that everything should have like its own sound and its own signature, blah blah. But I was working on a Corvalet track once, and this is just like a segue into like what I actually use for referencing. But I'm sort of giving you a reason why I do it after I discovered this plugin that I use called I use Metric AB and Sample Magic AB, but that's beside the point. I was working on a Corvalet track, not to, put myself under the microscope, and I'm like, this sounds cool, as it is right now. And like you develop a bias because, like they say, your ears have a short attention span. So you quickly get used to what you're listening to and just think that it's right because that's what you're calibrated to at the moment.
Exactly.
So then like I'm putting it on like other speakers and I'm comparing it to stuff and I'm like, well, what am I doing wrong here? Why does this sound like this? And long story short, I threw some Nickelback and Breaking Benjamin, top singles into this AB plugin and toggled back and forth. And the weirdest thing happened that I hadn't encountered consciously before. I was missing like all sorts of like 901K in my guitar distortion. And I'm like, wow, that sounds a lot fuller in the upper mids. So I start cranking that area of my guitar tracks, And then magically, the upper mids just bloomed and it sounded a lot fuller. And I was like, oh, no shit, I got to start referencing more.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically, depending on what I'm going for, like if, different types of material, I will generally reference a lot of stuff by Bob Rock. So like 90s Metallica, stuff like, Howard Benson, David Bendeth stuff like 3 Days Grace or Breaking Benjamin, it's basically like top 40 modern rock, anything mixed by like Chris Lord-Alge, Randy Staub, those kind of guys. Cause or Andy Wallace even, Nirvana type of stuff, whatever.
For sure.
Because that's the stuff that works and is on, it's just, there's no denying that stuff is successful for a reason and has stood the test of time. So, people will argue and say, well, whatever you're mixing, should have its own sound. It's like, yeah, but it's got to be at a certain level to begin with. You know what I mean? Because, at the same time, I know it's art, but it's also a business. And if you want people to listen to your stuff, culturally, we have expectations. And that's across the board. You've done film and photography and stuff. People expect things to look a certain way, regardless of your personal taste. They're used to seeing certain things in the public eye.
Exactly.
So there is like a preconceived notion, if you will, of what the product should sound or look like.
And there's a certain dynamic range they're expecting.
Right.
So when the guitars bloomed, when you moved it up at 900 hertz, based on that reference,
Sure.
the AB between the reference track, that's moving it towards where the public expects to hear a certain sound.
Yeah,
Okay,
that reference is on their playlists.
And that goes to portability.
Sure.
Right. So, and that's more likely to sound great, hopefully, on any playback system.
Right.
Sure. So, yeah, I think using plenty of references, whatever works, and regardless of what anybody thinks about Nickelback or a Bob Rock production, they
Yep.
sound great.
Oh, sure.
If it might not be your taste in music, but it's very difficult to debate that those are sonically some of the best recordings.
Yeah, not to go on the Bob Rock tangent, but how many producers out there can you say, other than maybe Rick Rubin, have topped the charts with Loverboy, Metallica, Michael Bublé? You know what I mean? It's the entire spectrum, and they're all hits.
Right.
So.
Yeah, so some of the best producers, they're jumping all over to different genres, and it's just they've got the golden ears.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think part of it, especially with someone like Rick Rubin, there's a huge amount of prepping. There's a big front end. I remember System of a Down took it to the next level once Rick Rubin started helping them.
What
with
album was
their
that? Like
production.
Toxicity or?
Yeah. So before that, they were, I don't want to say a B-list band, but in terms of record sales and ticket sales, their breakthrough album, Toxicity, was really what put them on the map.
That had like Chop Suey and all that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So Chop Suey was a lot of people's first exposure to System of a Down. And when they talk about the recording of that album, they were in a rehearsal space for 2 or 3 months.
Pre-production.
2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
And then they were ready to go into a studio.
Right.
That's ridiculous.
I have to just elaborate on that for a sec, because in my experience working with some different types of metal bands and whatnot, it blew my mind being at people's garages and basements tracking, doing guitar or bass dubs or what have you, after being in a studio doing drum parts, that these bands, they would say that they would rehearse. These are bands that would rehearse, once, twice a week. They had gigs all over when, this is like 15 years ago at this point, and I'm sitting there, and they played shows too, and I'd seen them on YouTube, and then there were successful shows, a lot of a big following and whatnot. And then I'm sitting there like in a studio setting, quote unquote, in someone's house doing overdubs. And one of the guys is, running the console, because I'm just like the consultant at the point, because, for my money and whatnot. And one guy stops the other guy like, wait, what's that guitar part that's happening there? In like, bar 30 something or whatever. Oh yeah, that's this, and this. And it's like, did you always play it like that? And in my mind, I'm like, hold the phone, people. You don't know what each other are playing, but you rehearse twice a month and you gig regularly. Like, how are you even pulling this off? And that's actually on my website. I had posted a blog about this because it just blew me away. Basically, the long and the short of it was it's a blog from years ago where I basically said that, even though you're a metal band, it wouldn't kill you to sit there and do like sectional rehearsals on acoustic instruments so you can hear and you're paying attention and you're talking to each other. Because even in my own experience being in a rehearsal space, you're in like a living room sized place and you've got a drummer just banging away like he's on stage, hitting cymbals at 120 dB. You've got a PA system for vocals that can't overpower that enough to hear anything worth a damn. So you've got a vocalist straining their vocal cords to be heard, and you're not rehearsing like in a productive way.
It's crazy.
None of you can hear what each other are doing. You're just banging through these songs like, just because you're existing, basically. And that's when it just hit me that, like, people, and I guess that's where my classical training came into play as far as my methodology goes. Because, in a classical environment, like in orchestra, symphony, what have you, you go to rehearsal and you're not over amplified and you can hear each other and the conductor's identifying specific problems in different sections and whatnot. And to me, that's what rehearsal is. I've asked bands before, I'm like, do you guys, say it's a song with intricate guitar parts, or like say you've got a band where there's 3 or 4 singers, for instance, doing Eagles type of stuff in the chorus or what have you. How many bands can say that they actually sat there and just worked on that section and know what each other are doing till you can interact with them?
Exactly.
That was screaming to me during this recording. I'm like, how are you recording an album and you don't know what each other play, but you've rehearsed these songs umpteen million times? That doesn't even compute in my head. Sorry for the tangent, but it's just like...
Well, it was a good tangent, and I agree with you. And it seems to be a problem that just gets worse and worse with these bands, that they're just not rehearsing and they want to fix it all in the mix.
Right.
If they don't sing something quite right, they're like, well, can't you just fix that with auto-tune?
And the problem there is things are getting better and better. It's funny you bring that up because I actually just got my my update last week for Melodyne 5 just came out. And basically the kicker there, or selling point, I should say, is there's different tiers of Melodyne, as you probably remember, different versions and what they're capable of doing. But they've been able to now tell Melodyne what is an S sound and what the sibilance was, I believe it was, and then split that from the note. So they're not pitch correcting the parts that aren't pitched, so to speak. And then you can also do all the quantization, and you can, basically generate harmonies off of that stuff and whatnot. So it's pretty crazy what you can do. There's people that get creative with it, which I think is awesome. But to rely on that, I guess, isn't the best philosophy if you want to be the best musician that you can be.
That was already impressive 15 years ago, what you could do with auto-tune.
Oh, yeah.
Just tracking that movement by movement with the key points and Pro Tools back in the studio back in 2003. They worked wonders even back then, and now they got the rack mount versions that they're using live.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you don't even have to sound right live anymore, which is kind of crazy. But you do need to hit the right notes on your guitar and on your bass. And, if they're not rehearsing... You can tune that too, actually. Yeah, but if you're not tight live...
Yeah.
I think that's what Rick Rubin was doing for 2 or 3 months in the rehearsal space with System of a Down, is they were just... That album, when you go back and listen to it, is just so tight.
Yeah. Well, and like what you said about the reference it mixes prior to, and then we just brought up auto-tune and pitch correction. That also speaks to, like we said before, what our society's ear is tuned to, so to speak, calibration-wise, is because people are used to hearing perfect now, like in a final product. So, I've even read articles where, there's Nashville engineers and whatnot who will... They'll just run auto-tune on a vocal for, any name country singer, Keith Urban, Toby Keith, whoever, and they'll just run auto-tune on like a default setting during a mix, just to catch anything just slightly, even though it's mostly a perfect performance pitch-wise, just because that's now what the technology is so accessible and affordable that it's looked upon as lazy now if you're not doing it, because that's what's expected of you. Sort of like using drum samples and such. If you're using all live drums for a rock or metal band, they better be banging because people are expecting the sampled sound that has that punch to it.
Exactly.
It's just what people are used to hearing, what they expect.
So they keep raising the bar, and you got to keep up.
Yeah. And it's like, you went from 4 tracks to now everyone should have like all the Steven Slate samples. You know what I mean? So it's a different set of tools that you're required to have.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's maybe one of the big changes that we've seen in the last 10 years, where that stuff has gone from useful to expected.
Right. And on that note, too, I was watching a Nail the Mix episode with one of my favorite producers out of Denmark, Jacob Hansen. He's done a lot of my favorite bands, even more recently. And he was, he was explaining a lot of sort of those types of techniques that he'll use on mixes now for like the most minute areas of production. And one example of that is basically he has a habit now of having his assistant run all bass tracks of a performance, for example, through Melodyne and snapping them first, because he noticed that a lot of bassists, especially those who play with a pick, they might not have the best technique, and he'll notice his ears are so tuned that he'll notice they'll sound off, because if they're digging in too hard and incorrectly, as you would know, the pick attack, you're pulling the string ever so slightly sharp before it actually rings, sort of, because of the distance the pick travels before the string is released. Mm-hmm. And he said that he's noticed that kind of like rubs against the guitars in a weird way, because it's just slightly out for a split second. So he'll have his assistant go in there and tune that bass back to true pitch where it's supposed to be, independent of the pick attacks. So it's just like, it's perfect. It's dead on. Because he said otherwise he gets like a headache, and like it's like an annoying thing to him.
So that's somebody with golden ears that's operating at the highest level of precision possible.
Pretty much.
It's like somebody was telling me that Bob Ludwig is using a custom-made set of studio monitors he paid $800,000 for.
Holy shit.
That are bolted to the concrete foundation of the building in his mastering suite.
Wow. With
some ridiculous bolts.
So is that like an acoustic thing or like an anti-theft thing?
It's got something to do with the bass response.
Okay.
Where he wants it coupled with this, like they poured these bolts into the concrete foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they put it through the box, and they went through this pretty elaborate sequence to create this studio with these big speakers that nobody else has.
Right.
And the whole thinking is that, you're not quite in an anechoic chamber. But
is that chamber where like you can hear your blood vessels and all that? It's like negative something.
Right. Yeah. Where there's just, you can't hear anything.
Right. Except for like the inside of your body.
Right. The only sound is coming from you, and nothing's reflecting back. And
I've heard the record for that is like 45 minutes.
You'll start to have auditory hallucinations very quickly.
Yeah, I want to try that. I think it's in like the Middle East somewhere, isn't it? Or
they've got a bunch of them. The Blue Microphone Company has one at their factory.
Oh, I thought there was just one of these.
No, Blue in Latvia has a anechoic chamber that they use for microphone testing.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, and theirs uses a pretty complex sequence of wood lats jutting out,
right?
Kind of like a skyline on steroids, and you can just walk out onto a catwalk into it or something. It's pretty wild, yeah.
Yeah, no, I would love to try that. Like I said, I heard the record that the record for someone staying seated in there without freaking out was like 45 minutes, because you just start to lose it. And I want to try it.
Well, have you ever spent too much time in in the booth recording, and you come outside and you come out and it's just too loud, like you can hear the air and
Not in a booth, but when I was probably years ago when I was a bit younger, and I would go to like an arena show with my dad, for instance, and I would have like those like Mondo foam earplugs in that basically cut out like everything. It's the kind of earplug that makes Metallica sound quiet in an arena.
right.
Yeah, you come out at night, like at the Times Union Center or whatever. You go to the parking lot, you start unscrewing those from your ear canal.
The big orange ones you wear at the range.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And like everything just comes rushing back in, like loud as hell.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I know that feeling. It's really weird.
Being in an anechoic chamber is probably like that, except even more intense.
Right.
I think it would be interesting to experience auditory hallucinations in an anechoic chamber.
Anything particular that you read that people experienced?
The way I understand it is the way our brains are wired, there is absolutely no natural situation to have an absence of noise. And our brains cannot run without noise.
Interesting.
So when you take sound away, the way our brain copes with that is to artificially manufacture noise to keep your brain running. So you're going to go nuts if you don't hear something. So it gives you fake sounds in the form of a hallucination.
That's almost like
It's a sound transfusion.
it's almost like a case of tinnitus that your brain just produces. Just like a
Because your brain knows somewhere, and that's what's so amazing, that they're like, there's a glitch in our brain that you guys discovered that we need to fix by adding fake sound.
right.
So you're going to start hearing stuff that isn't really there. So don't worry about it. You're not going crazy, but we got to do this so your brain doesn't blue screen.
Right.
Yeah. And that's perfectly normal. Anybody who goes in an anechoic is going to have auditory hallucinations.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's just one of those weird things that we never think about because, we've been around for who knows how many millions of years, like in this, model number.
Oh, sure.
Model number. Yeah. Not counting all the proto-humans, but nobody has ever invented an anechoic chamber until, recently.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you think about it, like you said about the whole evolution thing, I mean, we take sight and sound for granted, but I mean, really it's nothing more than like a safety mechanism at the core. I mean, we use it for entertainment because everything's like at our fingertips. But, if you're on like a show like Naked and Afraid, that's like semi-primal, your sight and sound aren't really for like, a convenience factor. It's more like to protect you.
Right. So you're going to get heightened senses.
Right.
So your brain's going to sense that, and it's going to turn up the gain. It's kind of cool the way that we're able to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
In terms of sound and that lack thereof, you mentioned CLA earlier. I was talking to somebody about Rocky IV, how CLA mixed Rocky IV, and that's one of the best sounding movies.
Oh, I'm sure.
And when you watch it, it sounds good. Yeah, somebody was talking about that, how, that's why it sounds so good. You go back and watch it.
So all the dialogue has 8K cranked?
Yeah. You ever be watching a movie and the dialogue's too low and the sound effects are too loud and they're all over the place and you find
Almost
yourself
every
questioning? Even if I'm watching a movie through expensive reference monitors, there's still some of that.
Even recent stuff, last 4 or 5 years.
Right. There's exceptions, and there have been exceptions going all the way back to Rocky IV and probably earlier where they get it right.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how often they get it wrong. What movie sounded good was Interstellar.
I actually have the soundtrack to that on my phone. I love the soundtrack.
Well, I thought they did a great job with every aspect of that, right down to some of the collisions and explosions in space were silent, as a reminder that would be a silent explosion if it was in space.
Yep.
Because there's no air to move, and no air equals no sound.
Right.
Right. So I thought that was, that was a bold choice to make. And I picture a bunch of studio executives in a boardroom arguing about that. Like,
That
what do you
wasn't
mean there's no
cool.
explosions? Yeah, it's definitely not a Michael Bay film.
The antithesis of Michael Bay, if you will.
Exactly.
But speaking of inconsistent mixes, I hate to say it, but documentaries in specific, and one particular one is Sound City. Have you noticed that problem in there? Like the dialogue and then the music just ramps up super loud, like 20 dB louder. It's crazy. It's just like, hey, my name's Dave Grohl, and then, bam, and I'm like, guys, just turn the music down just a scotch, man.
They've got those old specs that, in my opinion, should not be followed anymore. In terms of dialogue, sound effect, and
it just
music.
gets old, like riding your volume knob on your device, just because you're like, all right, dialogue's on, turn it up. All right, now it's the music again, turn it down. Are we still rolling?
Well, that's interesting. It says recording interrupted. Please wait.
Nice. Weird.
So it's all this tech stuff that you want to stay out of the way for podcast.
Right.
Most DSLRs will not record more than 30 minutes because of tariffs. It's an additional 6.5% to export out of Japan for a camcorder, and a camcorder is classified as a device that records for more than 30 minutes. So most of the DSLRs cut off at 29 minutes and 59 seconds.
There's a rule to this?
Right.
Wow.
Right. So they cut it off, and that's never an issue, even for a filmmaker. The only time that ever becomes an issue is if you want to continuously record, which is rare. But if we want to sit here and have a long-form conversation and not want to think about the cameras, the easiest workaround is to use an HDMI recorder. So then that becomes this whole can of worms. Like, okay, well, which HDMI recorder? Is it NTFS or
PAL?
is it FAT32? Because FAT32 is limited to 2 gigabyte files being saved to it.
Right.
So it needs to break it up into pieces, like we were messing around with the 2 pieces of video. Wouldn't it be easier to just have one big MP4 or MOV file?
Right.
And if you want to do that, there's some products that are happy to do that for you at a massive price tag.
Sure.
Yeah, it's like, dude, I just want to do some podcasts and maybe cut some footage together. It's like, take it easy. So like...
there's no happy medium.
Yeah, the wide shot, I've just got this no-name HDMI recorder. It's nothing crazy. It's just, decent quality.
Yeah, so as long as the camera stays on, it's recording.
Exactly.
Right.
And you can tell the camera to take all the information off, so it just records the HDMI output without like the settings or anything showing on it or the focus points, and it looks just fine. So, I'm just kind of testing that out, and if it works okay, if there's not too many glitches like we saw with that one file that didn't want to take, but it would open on the computer.
Right.
So who knows what's going on there? That could be anything. If that works well enough and it'll sync together, because it seems like what it's doing is it's just putting one red frame at the beginning of the end, like as a signal.
Right.
And I don't know much about video. I'm not a filmmaker. I don't know if that's like a signal, like some kind of like SMTP time code kind of thing.
SMT, yes.
Right, yeah. So if it's like a SMT time code kind of thing where, there's software that senses the red frame and just meshes them together.
Yeah,
and that's just something I don't know about.
Right.
I looked it up a little bit. It looks like it's not a thing. It just has a red frame. Right. So it's a little bit of extra work to stitch these files together. So if we sit here and talk for 47 minutes, that'll be 4 files.
Right.
It'll be 3 15-minute files and then 2 minutes and however we keep talking.
Right.
But that is still way better, than having to stop and restart the cameras. And sometimes they get glitchy and there's... like, I don't know why that thing wants to stop and restart.
There was an incident I had. What was I doing? Yeah, I was doing drum tracks at a church for one of my friends from college. His little brother is a drummer, and he was the drummer for a pastor friend of his. And this was my first run-in with a computer failure during a recording, and it was my first MacBook Pro. I think this was like 2009, 2010, something like that. I might have told you about it because I knew you before this. And it just froze mid-drum take. and did the beach ball thing, pinwheel. And then I had a comedy recording I had to do after that with the same computer. And I told the comedian that this was down in like Woodstock or whatever. And I'm like, hey, this happened to me during a drum recording. So I really don't want to like lose this gig for you. So here's what I need you to do. Because I'm sitting right next to the stage while I'm recording him. And I, just for safety's sake, literally whenever there was like a long pause between punchlines, I would hit space bar, save, and then I would just start rolling immediately again. So I knew, whatever was recorded. But like you implied before, you don't want to have to worry about that. Like glitches or, stupid stuff like that. I mean, I know people have like redundant systems, like where if one drive fails, the other one keeps going. One time I was working at WAMC, the Linda down in Albany, and I forget if I was the recordist or the front of house guy at the time, but for this particular show. But anyway, just for that fact, we had the console was split in the control room between going to the Mackie 24-track hard disk recorder, and then a redundant line was going to a PC running Cubase just for a safety. Because there was one time where we actually had to stop during the intro of the first song of a set with a live audience to start over because the one recorder failed that early in the show. But it's like that's the reason this device exists, and it still failed. Like, the whole you had one job thing.
Exactly. And tape machines used to fail too, I guess. That's what somebody would point out, I guess. They're like, oh, well, the tape would just start flying all over. And
oh, shit.
And there's that old horror story about Billy Joel, his first album. They recorded it incorrectly, and the pitch was off.
Oh, no.
Right.
They didn't have the speed set right, I bet.
Yeah. So, and that was a disaster.
That must have been one of those variable machines, right? Because aren't they usually like 15 or 30 or 15 IPS, I think it is. Oh, speaking of which, did you ever see that the documentary I sent you about the one guy claiming, he said that he saw the documentation for Master of Puppets, and Fleming spilled the beans that apparently the song Master of Puppets was recorded slower and I think tuned to D standard. So James could, keep those rhythm guitars tight, and then they sped it back up to E for the final.
Fair enough.
But yeah, that just kind of blew my mind. I'm like, wow, you guys are doing stuff like this in 1986. Who would have thought? Especially a band like that. But
that album sounded okay, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That every time they'd record, it would get better. There was nowhere to go but up. Those early recordings, they're raw. They're just great songs, but nobody ever says, "Oh, I love the way Kill 'Em All sounds."
Yeah, no.
Like, no. Well, it's kind of funny. Like, they didn't really know how to do it yet.
Yeah. And like the guitar sound is basically, to my ear, just like a Boss DS1 straight into the console. No friggin' amp or anything.
Right. And if you look back into that same time range, there was other heavy metal bands that were having a lot more luck in the studio than Metallica in terms of sound quality. Judas Priest is a good example.
Yeah, Dio sounded awesome back then.
Oh, Dio had some great sounding records. Ozzy's records don't sound bad. You can go back and listen to like Diary of a Madman or Blizzard of Oz. Those aren't too bad.
Yeah.
They're a little lumpy here and there, but I've heard worse. Yeah, there's definitely some solid stuff coming out, but first few Metallica records, definitely not on that list.
Speaking of lumpy, you know what? Not to bring up Rat again, but one of the things I'm always confused about, and yes, always, because I think about it often, on Out of the Cellar, the snare sound on those drums is what I would deem not quite terrible, but to me as a kid listening to that, and still now sort of, those toms are freaking awesome. So it's like a weird mismatch. Those toms have like that, that arena, nice slap to them and stuff, and big and powerful, and then the snare is just like all bottom mic basically.
If it works, it works.
Yeah, it's weird because it's just that if that was a sample pack in a library, I wouldn't put that snare with those toms, so to speak. But
That's a good case for setting the references aside once in a while.
yeah,
But it's interesting that we touched on ability today because I see the same thing with some of the modern music. It's like, are you guys practicing
yeah,
anymore? But then there's some really good stuff too. One thing I wonder about is how many people just aren't going to pursue music because there's just so many people doing it now that it's more accessible.
yeah,
There's just so many more albums coming out every year than there used to be. I think it's like 10 times the number of albums are coming out each year than 20 years ago.
yep,
There's just this amazing amount of music being produced. Okay, so it's a saturated market. You're less likely to get noticed.
yep,
You're less likely to, make a whole lot of money.
right,
And, artist and musician has always been the two lowest paying average professions.
right,
Yeah, so you've got some people way up at the top, and then everybody else is pretty much at the bottom, and there isn't a whole middle class of musicians,
yeah,
right? Yeah, so you're making nothing or you're making everything.
right,
There's a few people at the top, and that's Pareto's law. So you're just exponentially going to do better and better and better.
yeah,
So, a lot of bands they'll say, it took us 10 years to be an overnight success.
oh sure,
Right.
sure.
Yeah. So there's all that time they spend, and then finally they get noticed.
Well, yeah, it's like it's sort of like when I learned after I was an avid fan of bands like Green Day, for instance. That was back in my middle school years. It wasn't until college when I met other people, who were into that scene back when I was younger as well, but knew the bands better, and we're hanging out and they're showing me demos and records the bands put out before their major label debut that everyone in the mainstream thinks was their first album. But there's like 1 to 2 before that flopped, but only the diehard fans knew about them.
Exactly.
Like everyone thinks, for instance, I think it was Green Day had I think Dookie was like their first like huge success, but like few people knew about Kerplunk before that. And then I think there was like an EP before that. So, just as an example.
A lot of that stuff, they're just finding their feet. You know,
Yeah.
if you go farther back from the breakout album, you're usually disappointed.
Right.
Yeah, at least I am. Lou Reed's a perfect example of that. His first debut album, he wanted to self-produce it, because he was in Velvet Underground. He thought he knew about production.
Right.
Yeah, bombed. But that was, he was a celebrity because of Velvet Underground. Interesting guy, lots of press.
Yep.
So A&R didn't immediately drop him. And David Bowie noticed him, and David Bowie produced his sophomore album, Transformer.
Yeah, Lou Reed
Yep.
was my most recent knowledge of him was through that really weird collaboration with Metallica. That was a strange record.
That was a very strange record. I don't know if it was either of their best work, but it was interesting. So Transformer sold about 40 million copies. David Bowie produced it. It sounds like a Bowie record.
I think one of David Bowie's tracks in the 80s was one of CLA's big breakout singles that he mixed. Oh, I think it was Let's Dance. Was that it?
Terrible song.
But that was one of the tracks to cut CLA noticed.
That song did really well.
I'm sorry, was that CLA or was that Bob Clearmountain? Because he talks about Bob Clearmountain a lot. Maybe that was a Clearmountain mix.
What about when Bob Clearmountain mixed Use Your Illusion and they didn't like it? Remember that for Guns N' Roses?
I don't recall offhand, but I'm sure I read about it at some point.
Yeah.
Wasn't it Mike Klink or something like that?
Mike Klink was the engineer, and I think they did end up using his mixes now that I think about
And
it.
then it was the late Mike Shipley. He died a few years ago.
Yeah, but Mike Klink recorded a lot of Guns N' Roses stuff.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but that was a big step up for them in terms of sound quality. Those Use Your Illusion records,
Right.
Like they're much more polished than
I remember
Appetite.
the first time I ever heard November Rain. You know, that last sequence there where the guitar takes over as the main focus. I don't know if I'd call it the bridge, but that was like that last section there. That big guitar melody.
That album was a big deal.
Yeah.
For them. And that's, when people go back and listen to Guns N' Roses, I think a lot of them, they're listening to November Rain. The same way for Metallica, they're more paying attention to the Black Album than they are to their earlier stuff.
Right.
Huge changes in approach, for both bands.
Oh, yeah, sure. Did you know about the story about why Metallica hired Bob Rock?
Because their other albums sound like shit?
Well, it was actually a very specific reason. There, when I think it was Dr. Feelgood, when that came out by Motley Crue, they heard that song and they wanted that snare, and that's why they hired Bob Rock. It was a very, very specific requirement.
That's a pretty good sounding album.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I call it the 5-pound drumstick. Just where you get the full arm body swing, the Tommy Lee style.
Yeah, he was a heavy hitter.
Yeah.
Tommy Lee was. Yeah.
I just think drums sound better when you slow it down a little bit and you're grooving like that.
Did you like that Motley Crue movie?
Is it just me, or the casting for actors for those films are always so weird?
It's not just you. They drop the ball more often, but that wasn't bad. Like in my opinion,
yeah.
There's like Machine Gun Kelly. I thought did an awesome job. I'm not a fan of his music, but in terms of his acting ability in that movie,
which one was he?
He played Tommy Lee.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I thought he did a pretty good job.
Yeah,
sure. And I liked how they opened up with that movie. They're like, "Hey, this is going to be one of those movies." So
yeah,
tell the kids to get out. We're like
yeah,
right at the beginning
there was
of Act
some stuff
1.
in that party that I did not expect to see on a Netflix film.
Right at the beginning.
Yeah, because that movie, there was the that Def Leppard one called Hysteria, I think. The casting was weird there. And
that was bad casting. That felt like a budget problem to me, that whole movie.
They just, I don't know. The band members always feel like caricatures to me. Like the comedic version of the real guy. I don't know. It's hard to put my finger on it.
The worst one was the Elton John.
I didn't see that one. Rocket Man, right?
Yeah, don't watch it. Like, seriously, save yourself.
I thought Bohemian Rhapsody was good.
It was good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't dislike it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, casting. It's really, really, really difficult to cast those right because those, these people are icons. It's not just their music. It's them and their personalities.
Right.
And, we think we know these people, these celebrities, and then to watch an actor pretend to be them.
Yeah,
that's a tall order.
Cartoon is, I guess, a good description. The one I didn't mind as much because it wasn't a real band was God, what the hell is the name of the movie?
That Thing You Do.
I love that movie, but that wasn't it. I'm talking about the one with Mark Wahlberg and Zach Wilde, Steel Dragon. Rockstar, yes.
Oh, great movie. Well, the producers gave that a lot of thought, and the way I think they circumvented that was by using real musicians. You've got Jason Bonham as the drummer,
right? And Zach wrote all the music apparently to all those songs.
Zach Wilde,
yeah,
and so that lended an air of authenticity to it. Just having these guys who had spent their lives in studios and on the road and living that lifestyle. So I think that balanced it out pretty well.
It's actually funny. I'm speaking of That Thing You Do.
Let's take a caller.
Sure.
If we can. No, we can't. Here. Yo.
Hey, Rick, it's me, Bethany.
What's up? We're doing a podcast.
Just wanted to say, oh my God, thank you so much. I freaking love the recordings. I'm loving the song even more now that I'm hearing it recorded.
And I just wanted to give you a call and just say thank you so much for helping out with that, because I never even envisioned ever recording the song professionally. And now I've just been listening to it over and over again. And I was like, holy shit, I feel like we got to add some cello in there now that you mentioned it. So however soon you can get on that, I'm totally down for doing that, because it was freaking awesome.
I'm glad you like it.
I never even envisioned the song ever having anything but my voice and the guitar. But now that I'm listening to it, I'm like, that would be cool to have a version like that. If I just, after hearing it all, I was like, yeah, that would be awesome to add cellos to that. So yeah, no, I really appreciate this because I was not expecting any of this to even happen with this song.
Hell yeah.
So, but I'm in the parking lot of a Chinese restaurant and I think they just finished making my food. So I am going to say goodbye and I'm going to go say dirty things to this food while I eat it.
All right. I'll see you next week. Looking forward to seeing you guys again.
Yeah. I'll see you next week. Okay.
All right. Talk soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
So that's interesting. We were able to just pipe in the call.
That's cool.
But not right away because I had to disconnect on pair one phone.
Yeah.
And then forget it on this one.
Yeah.
And then reconnect it. And then it was able to hop on.
Right.
So that's impressive. So for the firmware to allow for you to do that. So we just took one phone off.
Yep.
Got another phone going. And it never stopped recording.
Right.
So that's kind of cool, I think.
It was strange though that it only had like the left channel.
That's an artifact of the new firmware.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it used to be dual mono.
Huh.
Right, I'm not happy about that either.
I like things even.
The workaround is to go ahead and plug in.
Right.
Yeah. But, yeah, I'm not happy about that part either.
You would need a USB-C adapter.
Mm-hmm. No, there's a jack, and it'll give you mix minus. So you can plug in right here under the phone. Yeah, and that'll allow you to...
Oh, yeah, if you have a headphone adapter.
A TRS, not a TRRS. But the TRS will let you hear just them.
Right.
Yeah. So that seems to work pretty good.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So there's that.
Alrighty.
But anyway, let's play this back, see what we got.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to the Creative Loitering podcast. Don't forget to ring the bell and subscribe and like and comment below and enable notifications and click the heart and leave a review and swipe right at Patreon and OnlyFans and make a donation and follow me on Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram and Twitter and WhatsApp and WeChat and TikTok and QQ and Qzone and Reddit and Twitch and YouTube and Vimeo and Pinterest and Periscope and Valence and Zelle and Venmo and Untapped and Alpha and Ubo and House Party and Peanut and Caffeine and 23 Snaps and Likey and Date Tracks and Academia and Fark and me. We own Tumblr and LinkedIn and Tagged and Nextdoor and Mixed and DeviantArt and Quora and Flickr and Meetup and Reverb and Goodreads and Flickster and Pairing Bridge and Wattpad and Crunchyroll and eBay and Smugmug and Skyrock and MyHeritage and LiveJournal and VK and Classmates and SoundCloud Bubbly and We Hearted and Influencer and blah 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 blah.